Hey guys, it's me, Halloween Dan, and today I'm doing a video that maybe I shouldn't be doing. There's a myriad of things I could be talking about right now. I could be talking about stuff coming to the UK stores, which I will do at some point, store walkthroughs and all that kind of stuff, because there's plenty of stuff to talk about now, but I'm not gonna lie, a lot of it's pretty average. I could be talking about things that I've made, things that I'm doing, things that I'm building, things that I've bought, but you know what? Today, I just felt like what I wanted to do, almost what I needed to do, was spend a little bit of time just not talking about that kind of stuff, and instead talking about Halloween.
What?
Now, some of you are going to go, Dan, you talk about Halloween all the time. It's a Halloween channel. What are you talking about? And what I mean is, especially for those of you who maybe haven't been with the channel that long, something I like to do from time to time is just talk about Halloween, strip it back, get rid of all the props and the animatronics, the haunts and the displays, get about the parties, all the commercial stuff, and focus instead for a moment upon the things that make Halloween what it is, without all the trappings and expensive stuff. Just take it down to its core of what makes it so special. I've tried to do this lots of times before, and to be honest, the more I dig at this and try to figure out what it is about Halloween that makes it so special to me, it's like opening a Pandora's box. The more things I discover, the more things I realize are an actual thing that make me love that time of year. Because the truth is, it isn't one thing or two things, it's a whole massive spectrum of things that makes Halloween what it is to me. And today I thought I'd try my hardest to talk about one of the things that is so hard to describe, yet it is a thing. It is a thing. I think many of you will have also seen this and felt this and experienced this. It is a thing that exists, but it is like catching smoke. There one minute, gone the next. Because today what I want to try and unpick is what makes the perfect Halloween landscape. It's a weird thing to talk about, I know, but I'm pretty sure it exists. So join me. So what do I mean when I say the perfect Halloween landscape? It's kind of a very peculiar thing to say, and to be honest, again, depending on where you live in the world, you'll probably think of this differently. If you were to hand me a pen and a piece of paper and say, draw the perfect Halloween landscape, Dan, I'd probably draw something pretty generic, like a creepy house up on a hill, darkened sky, bats flying across the moon, tombstones, creepy trees. That would be my perfect Halloween landscape. But the truth is, the perfect Halloween landscape is more subtle than that. It's not really as in your face. It's really quite a quiet, calm, unsuspecting thing sometimes. And sometimes it kind of creeps up on me in an unexpected way, and I only realize I'm in the perfect Halloween landscape, usually after I've already experienced it. It's kind of like when you experience a really vivid dream, and the next day you can just about remember it, and you're trying to think about it and remember what made it so vivid and why it felt so real. The more you think about it, the more it kind of vanishes from your grip, and the more you analyze it, the less sense it makes, until eventually it's entirely gone and you can't remember any aspect of it at all. It's kind of like that with this perfect Halloween landscape thing. An example of it that I have, there's a country lane 5-minute drive from my house that I use quite often to go to the neighbouring town over. It's a shortcut in essence, and it's a windy country lane, not unlike hundreds of others around the country. And it's surrounded by hedgerows and fields on either side, big tall trees, there's farms here and there, and older buildings here and there. And it's just a pretty ordinary country lane. But at this time of year, when the light is just right, and when the leaves are falling from the trees, there'll be just this moment where I feel like I've gone through some invisible barrier, and the world suddenly feels like this perfect Halloween landscape. There's something about the light, there's something about the trees, there's something about the way the buildings look sat in the landscape. I can't describe it too much because it feels Halloweeny, and then all of a sudden I'm out of the landscape and it doesn't anymore. It's very, very peculiar. Some part of my brain just sort of goes, oh, this is Halloweeny. And then as I start to look around and experience it, suddenly it's gone. There in 1 second, gone in a flash kind of thing. Let me know if you ever experienced that, if you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's a really, really subtle and hard to put your finger on thing, but it definitely exists, and I definitely get that tingle at this time of year, driving through certain landscapes at certain times of the day, with certain weather happening. It's a definite thing. But while I was thinking about this video and thinking about what made the perfect Halloween landscape, one place that I visit quite often kept coming back time and time again. And for me, it encapsulates this perfect Halloween landscape. To be honest, all times of the year, but particularly obviously in the autumn time. So I thought I'd share with you this story of this place. A little tiny creepy story that goes along with it that just enhances this Halloween feel, for me at least. Not far to the north of where I live, there is this vast parkland called Tatton Park. It's a very ancient parkland. It's been owned by the same family for hundreds of years. It's now owned by the National Trust and you can visit it. I've been visiting it since before I can remember. It's just that place, that local place that I go and many others do. It's a nice place to spend a day. It's a rolling landscape, mostly of grassland, which is stalked by big red deer. At this time of year, they're in full antler too, and they just look majestic and incredible. There's lakes, there's rivers, there's woodlands everywhere. It's a beautiful landscape to spend some time in. Most people's focus when they're visiting Tatton Park is on the Georgian mansion end of the park. It's a very ritzy mansion surrounded by beautiful gardens, and there's lots of things to do. There's a play area for the kids, and that's where most people make a beeline for. Me and my family, particularly at this time of year, would always make our way to a slightly more secluded and slightly less visited part of the park. It was a part of the park that was not only much quieter, but it was also filled with horse chestnut trees or conker trees and chestnut trees. And my dad was a big one for picking chestnuts. I've said this before. So in the autumn, when the chestnuts were ripe, we would often head to this little corner of Tatton Park where there were plenty of chestnut trees and where we were kind of left to our own devices a little, and it wasn't quite as busy as everywhere else. But every time we'd visit this part of the park, I would get this tingle that I couldn't really explain throughout most of my childhood, but there was just something about it that ticked all these little boxes in my head. Where you'd park the car, it was mostly the same open grassland where the deer were sort of grazing on the fields and stuff, and it was a great spot for flying a kite or for having a game of football. It was a really nice place just to visit, just to do that kind of stuff. Away from that side, there was a different side, and it was dominated by Tatton Old Hall. As its name suggests, it's a very old hall. It's been there a very long time. The building that's there right now dates back from the Tudor period, I think about the late 1400s, early 1500s. But there's been a building there for far longer than that. And it's the building that actually gives the park its name, Tatton Park. The hall itself was always closed to visitors throughout the year. And the reason we would head to this particular location was more for the trees and the chestnut trees that were in that particular part of the park. That was my dad's focus. Me, however, I had a slightly different focus, and that was the hall itself. Every autumn, we'd head to this part of the park, and from the car park, we'd follow a little dirt track that led towards the hall. This track traversed the edge of a very small little valley with a stream that ran down the middle of it. On the slightly murkier, mistier days, which for some reason were always the days when my dad liked to go to these sorts of places, a fog or a mist would kind of linger in that valley, adding to this kind of strange, eerie, creepy atmosphere that was in this part of the park anyway. Because we'd often have it to ourselves too, It felt like you'd gone back in time. It felt like we're revisiting something from like some medieval period. It really did feel almost primordial in some strange kind of way. And as we'd follow the path, a big patch of trees would appear just ahead of us. The trees were really quite ancient trees, made lots of different ones. My dad's focus were the chestnut trees, of course, but most of the trees there were hundreds of years old. And somewhere hidden amongst those trees was Old Tatton Hall. As we'd get closer, the hall itself would start to slowly materialize from between the trees. It was made out of dark red bricks, which at that time of year seemed to glow amongst the falling leaves and foliage of the trees. The house itself almost seemed slightly camouflaged as we'd approach it. I'd only catch glimpses of it through the trees. And while my dad would start foraging around between the trees looking for chestnuts, my focus would firmly be on the hall itself. Once you were up close, you would realise that the hall was surrounded by a perimeter wall made out of the same dark red brick. So often you couldn't get a proper good view of the hall, which in a strange way added to its mystery. But what also added to the hall's mystery was that it was supposedly very, very haunted. In fact, Old Tatton Hall is supposedly one of the most haunted buildings in Britain, which is saying something. And so with that kind of reputation and me being the kind of guy I was, I spent most of my childhood being quite strangely obsessed with this building. As me and my siblings would walk along the perimeter wall, I'd be trying to catch a proper glimpse of the hall, hoping to see something a little bit spooky. And then as we'd come along one side of it, we'd reach the entrance gate to the hall, which was always padlocked. No one ever went in there. You never saw anyone in the grounds. You never saw anyone maintaining it or doing anything in there. It was just a lone structure surrounded by these huge ancient trees. And on these strange misty days when we'd often frequent this corner of the park, it just looked incredibly eerie. We would look through the gateway where there was a little gap where the padlock was, trying to catch a proper glimpse of the hall. And only from this direction would you actually be able to see it in its entirety. This very strange looking L-shaped building with these dark ancient windows sort of pocketed all over the place. Me being me, I'd stand there staring at these dark windows, hoping to see something. Maybe a spooky person would suddenly appear. It would never happen, and eventually we would move on. But as we'd leave the hall, I would be looking back over my shoulder, the presence of the place feeling just incredible. It was almost untangible just how incredible that area of the park felt, and the landscape around it and the trees and everything about it felt so Halloween-y. It was a spooky, eerie, silent kind of a feeling that even to this day I cannot explain, but it was there nevertheless. What came to solidify this place in my mind as this truly spooky and Halloween-y place happened when I was probably about 12. As the years had gone on, Halloween had become more celebrated in the UK. Spooky places like Tatton Old Hall had started to cotton on to this fact and realised there was a bit of money to be made here. An event was announced where a kind of a scare walk was going to be set up inside Tatton Old Hall, and people could obviously go and visit and walk through the hall and be frightened. The moment I heard about it, I knew I wanted to go. I'd never experienced a scare walk up until that point. I'd never experienced anything like that, so really didn't know what to anticipate, but I knew I wanted to visit that hall. I'd been looking at it and wondering about this mysterious old building for as long as I could remember. So I definitely wanted to get an opportunity to go in, and on Halloween as well. Yes, please. So my mum bought the tickets and we went with my brother and sister and a few friends. Going through Tatton Park at night when it was dark was a completely different experience for me. I was so used to visiting during the day when it felt kind of familiar and friendly, that at night with the big ancient looming trees of the parkland surrounding the driveway as you headed through the park, it really did feel quite terrifying, actually, really quite eerie. And as we pulled up to the car park, which was the main car park for the hall itself, I felt like I was not in Tatton Park. I was in some really bizarre Twilight Zone kind of a landscape. The weirdest part was that for once, the hall wasn't hidden, it was brightly lit in Halloween-y purples and greens. But as we walked up to the hall and headed our way through those large ancient trees, them casting these strange shadows because of the lights projected upon the hall, the eeriness of the place settled back in with me. I'd wondered if maybe some of the mystery and the magic would be lost because it was now being like commercialized and there was going to be a lot of people around. But it wasn't lost. There was something about the presence of that hall sat amongst that landscape of ancient trees and the little river running by it and all that stuff. It just felt like something from a pretty dark fairy tale. And even though there were lots of people around, some dressed up in medieval garb, some sort of just visitors, the atmosphere wasn't lost. It was still felt quiet and still and eerie, the trees reaching up towards the sky. I remember it was quite a cold evening too, so you could all see each other's breaths as we talked. It added to the eeriness of the place somehow. Eventually, it was my family's turn to go into the hall, and we were being led by a guide as we made our way through the building, which none of us had ever been in. Needless to say, I was not disappointed. We were immediately ushered into a grand medieval hall. Beautiful timber work on the ceiling, the walls adorned with tapestries and the heads of dead animals, mostly stags and stuff. There was a wide, long table set out with kind of like a medieval meal. And in the very center of the room was an open fire, not in a hearth, but a big open fire that was lit, and smoke was going up into the rafters. The whole room was hazy and smoky, and there was that smell of smoke in the air too, which definitely added to the atmosphere. And though the space was quite vast, because they kept it quite dark with only the fire and a few candles lighting the room, it felt kind of oppressive and eerie and strange all at the same time. What I most vividly remember as well was that they had a woman scare actor stood by this fire in the center of the room. She wasn't looking at us, she had our back to us the whole time, but she was eerie and strange, just this creepy old woman stood staring into the fire. It sent a tingle down my spine because the anticipation began to build of what was this woman gonna do? Was she gonna leap out at us at some point? Who knew? But before she had a chance to do anything, we were ushered on up the stairs into the rest of the building. The next 10 to 15 minutes are a bit of a blur, to be honest. It was definitely scary. There were plenty of scare actors jumping out. We were led through room after room, each with their own little story, and there were scare actors jumping out here and there, and it was definitely pretty petrifying. For me, the most terrifying part of it all, though, was knowing that this old hall actually was supposed to be haunted. And were these scare actors or were these ghosts? Was I going to walk into the next room and there actually be a spirit in there? There was something about the fact that this building was so supposedly haunted that added to this incredibly terrifying atmosphere that existed within the hall that night. Soon, though, we were being ushered back out and back down into the old Tudor hall. And as we headed into the hall, I remember thinking to myself, this is where that woman by the fire is gonna jump out at us. This is where she's gonna shine. Something's gonna happen. And as we headed into the hall, she was nowhere to be seen. She'd left the fireplace, and I started looking around into the dark corners of the room, wondering when she was gonna make another appearance. But she didn't, and we soon made our way out of the building and were out in the grounds of the hall again. We stood probably for another half an hour or so, taking in the atmosphere of the hall and chatting amongst ourselves about the experience we'd just had and what were our scariest moments. And when it came to me, I said, well, the scariest thing for me actually was that lady right at the beginning that was stood by the fire. I was waiting for her to do something the whole time, but she didn't. And that, I think, actually made her even scarier than some of the jump scares that we had, because it was that anticipation of what she was going to do. But everyone just sort of looked at me a little perplexed. What lady by the fire? They were asking. I don't remember that. I said, when we first went in and there was the fire in the hall and there was that lady just sort of hunched over the fire, looking into the fire. I was waiting for her to do something the whole time, but she didn't. And then she wasn't there at the end. But no one else remembered seeing her. And I was really perplexed by that. They'd all been there. They'd all been in that room. She was so obvious, stood by the fire, but no one else had seen her. So then they started to laugh and joke, "Oh, Dan saw an actual ghost, ha ha ha, funny, funny." I laughed it off too. She was obviously just a scare actor that no one else had noticed. But as the years went on, I couldn't help but wonder to myself, was it a ghost? Had I seen something that no one else had? Maybe I got my wish in a strange way. I'd spent all my childhood peering through that gap in the gate, trying to see a ghost lingering in one of the darkened windows. Maybe that night, one of the ghosts decided to make an appearance just for me. Probably not the case, but it makes a good story, right? We now visit this hall quite often. We go to Tatton Park all the time, and I take my children, and particularly in the autumn, we like to go there, we like to pick conkers, all in the woods that surround that old hall. And the strange thing is, even without having to tell my children anything spooky about the place, I can tell that they pick up on the same atmosphere that I used to pick up. They look around at that landscape, the wide open fields grazed by red deer to the left of you, but then this spooky little woodland that surrounds this ancient walled hall. It just looks like Halloween, and I think they pick up on it just as I used to do. And I can't help myself but tell them as we walk around its grounds, maybe I once saw a ghost in there. And it is, after all, one of the most haunted buildings in Britain. My kids laugh it off, and I laugh it off with them, but I'm not gonna lie to you. Even now as a fully grown adult, there are times when I peer through that gap in the gate. I look into those darkened windows, and I wonder, what did I actually see that spooky Halloween night? So that's my perfect Halloween landscape. In some ways, you might say it's almost the generic image that I talked about right at the start of the video. An old hall surrounded by creepy trees in an ancient landscape. It is pretty much the epitome of Halloween in so many different ways, but I think there is a layer of subtlety to it that I don't think you'll understand unless you experience it firsthand. And I feel as though there are a lot of people who have that. So I would love it if you'd fill the comment section with your perfect Halloween landscape. What is Halloween's landscape to you? Is it what I've described, or is it something completely different? Is there a place that you like to visit that gives you that Halloween-y vibe? Do you understand what I mean by the perfect Halloween landscape, or are you still in search of it? Either way, let me know in the comments section. Give this video a like, give me a subscribe if you've not already done so, and I will see you in the next one. Keep it spooky. Bye.